The first thing Owen Mercer wrote down was not that the two beings were gray. By then, everyone inside the facility already knew what they looked like. What bothered him was what happened after midnight. When the doctors left, the corridor emptied, and the beings were apparently alone. At 12:17 a.m., on October 11, 1978, Subject 1 stood from the far wall and walked to the exact position Dr. Hal Brenner had occupied earlier that afternoon. Then it placed both hands behind its back. Brenner always stood that way. Subject 2 crossed the room and lowered itself onto the examination table. The first being moved beside it, and for the next 8 minutes, Owen watched the two of them reconstruct the examination the human scientists had performed only hours earlier. No instruments, no instructions, no humans inside the room. When it ended, Owen opened the private notebook he had begun carrying in his jacket and wrote 6 words. "They are practicing what we do." 3 weeks later, he crossed out the word practicing. He replaced it with another, learning. And by the time he realized what they were actually learning, parts of his official record had already begun disappearing. Owen Mercer was 39 years old in the autumn of 1978. He repaired television equipment for a living. Not home televisions, though he had started there. After leaving the Army Signal Corps, he spent almost a decade maintaining closed-circuit camera systems, microwave relays, magnetic tape recorders, and industrial monitoring equipment for government contractors across the Southwest. He was good at machines precisely because he did not romanticize them. A camera was a camera. A relay was a relay. A dead circuit had a reason for being dead. Find the reason and the mystery disappeared. That belief had served him well for most of his adult life. Then, a former supervisor called one afternoon and offered him a temporary night assignment at what Owen's paperwork identified only as Western Signals, Calibration Annex 12. The location was several hours from the nearest major city. The salary was nearly double what he was making. His wife, Ruth, was 7 months pregnant. Owen said yes before asking what he would be calibrating. He regretted that later. The annex did not look secret. That was the first thing he remembered. A low concrete operations building, 2 communications towers, a weather mast, chain link fence, gravel parking lot, a row of prefabricated structures that looked as though they had been ordered from a catalog. There were no fighter aircraft, no enormous radar dishes, no soldiers marching through the yard. If you passed the property on the highway, you might have assumed it measured atmospheric conditions. That was apparently the point. At the outer gate, Owen showed identification. Inside the administrative building, he showed it again. Personal cameras, radios, recording devices, and anything containing removable film went into a metal locker. Then Lieutenant Arthur Cole walked him down a narrow corridor and showed him the night control room. 4 black and white monitors, 2 magnetic recorders, a maintenance bench, oscilloscopes, a telephone connected only to internal extensions. A thick observation window occupied the far wall. Beyond it was another corridor. Beyond that corridor were 2 rooms. Owen was told almost nothing about them. His instructions were mechanical. Maintain image quality. Maintain audio channels, even though little usable audio was expected. Confirm recording speed. Log equipment failures. If anything inside the observation rooms changed unexpectedly, call the officer upstairs. Owen asked what counted as unexpectedly. Cole said, "You'll know." That answer irritated him. On the second night, he understood it. Camera 3 had begun rolling vertically. Owen was adjusting the synchronization control when something walked into frame. For several seconds, he assumed somebody had moved a medical mannequin into the room. It was small, perhaps 4 feet tall, thin enough that the arms seemed slightly too long. The head was disproportionately large. The monochrome camera softened everything else. No pores, no hair, no clothing Owen could identify. Then the figure turned toward the lens. The eyes appeared almost entirely dark. Owen's hand stopped on the control knob. He stepped back. Lieutenant Cole was standing behind him. Owen had not heard the door open. "What the hell is that?" Cole looked at the monitor. "Subject 2. Owen waited. Cole said nothing more. Subject 2, what? That's the designation. What is it? Not part of your assignment. Owen looked toward the second monitor. Another figure stood inside the neighboring room, slightly shorter. Same general proportions. That's one? Cole nodded. Owen laughed once, mostly because his nervous system needed somewhere to put the reaction. You're serious. Very. Where did they come from? Not part of your assignment. Are they alive? Cole finally looked directly at him. You will find this job considerably easier if you learn which questions belong to your assignment. Owen learned. Not immediately, but quickly. During daytime operations, scientists entered the rooms in pairs. Medical personnel sometimes accompanied them. Owen did not know what most of the equipment did. Some instruments resembled ordinary hospital devices. Others arrived inside cases and left again before evening. The staff used careful language. Nobody said alien. Nobody said extraterrestrial. Nobody said creature. Subject 1. Subject 2. Material. Sample response. Observation. If extraordinary things are surrounded by ordinary nouns long enough, the mind begins cooperating. That surprised Owen more than he expected. On the first week, he could barely look at the monitors without feeling his stomach tighten. By the third, he ate a sandwich while Subject 2 stood 8 feet away behind glass. Human beings normalize almost anything. The scientists had normalized more than Owen. Dr. Hal Brenner was a tall, angular man in his 50s who rarely entered the rooms without folding his hands behind his back. Dr. Joanne Pike was younger, sharp-eyed, impatient with assistants, and tapped her pencil twice against her clipboard before beginning questions. Sergeant Willis worked security. He had a habit of resting his right thumb against his belt when officers were absent and dropping the hand immediately when Cole appeared. A medical orderly named Frank Bellamy rolled one shoulder when tired. Another technician, Ellis Vaughn, checked wall panels by tapping them twice, pausing, then tapping once. Owen noticed these things because night work is built from repetition. You learn people by their noises, their footsteps, how they close doors, how long they spend at the coffee machine. None of it seemed relevant to the two beings. Until Owen's 7th shift. That afternoon, Dr. Brenner and Pike conducted an examination on Subject 1. Owen watched portions of it while replacing a weak monitor tube. Brenner stood near the subject, with his hands behind his back. Pike moved an instrument along the being's right arm. Frank placed several ordinary objects on a metal tray. A paper cup, a rubber sphere, a steel cylinder. The researchers appeared to be testing recognition or response. Subject 1 showed almost none. Shortly before midnight, the staff left. Frank forgot a chair beside the wall. Owen finished a maintenance form. Several minutes passed. When he looked at camera 3 again, Subject 1 was standing in Brenner's position, hands behind its back. Owen leaned closer. Subject 2 entered from the adjoining space. It moved to the examination surface, lay down, placed its arms beside its torso. Subject 1 stepped alongside. Its right hand moved slowly over Subject 2's forearm. No contact, then across the chest. Pause, then toward the head. Owen stopped breathing for a moment. He had seen this, not something like it, this. The same order Pike had followed earlier. Subject 1 turned toward the empty chair where Frank had been sitting, then back toward the table. It continued. 8 minutes. When the sequence ended, the beings changed positions. Now Subject 1 lay down. Subject 2 repeated the procedure. Owen reached for the internal telephone. His fingers rested on the receiver. Then he stopped. Nothing dangerous was occurring. No door had opened. No alarm was active. The subjects were merely moving. That was all the official language could contain. Owen opened the shift log. At 12:17, he wrote, subjects displaying coordinated post-session movement. Then, in the notebook inside his jacket, he wrote something else. They are practicing what we do. At 7:10 the next morning, Lieutenant Cole read the official entry. How long? About 20 minutes total. The recorders were active? Yes. Cole removed the tape reel himself. Normally, recordings remained in place until a clerk collected them near noon. Owen watched him place the reel inside a metal case. What do you think they were doing? Cole closed the latch. Your job is to record behavior. That is behavior. Then you have done your job. Cole left. The tape did not return. The next evening, Owen expected the same thing. Nothing happened for nearly an hour. Then Subject 2 approached the west wall. It raised one hand. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Owen frowned. The being shifted several inches. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Ellis, the maintenance technician. He had repaired a ventilation panel that afternoon using exactly the same rhythm. 2 taps. Listen, 1 tap, move. Subject 2 repeated it across 3 sections of wall. This time, Owen called Cole. The lieutenant arrived and watched beside him. Neither man spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Owen said, "You see it." "I see movement. It's copying Vaughn." Cole did not answer. "Ellis did that exact thing today." Cole replied, "Record what occurs." That's what occurred. No. What occurred is that the subject contacted the wall in a repeated pattern. Owen looked at him. That's a hell of a way to describe it. It is an accurate way. Cole stayed until the being stopped. The following morning, a new typed instruction had been clipped above the night log. Observations must describe movement only. Do not characterize intent. Owen read it twice. He understood the logic. Intent was interpretation. Movement was observable. But something about the instruction bothered him. It allowed the record to remain accurate while becoming less meaningful. Subject imitates technician. That suggested intelligence. Subject contacts wall twice, pauses, contacts once. That sounded like noise. The facts remained. The pattern disappeared. So Owen began keeping better private notes. Not because he intended to expose anybody. He had no reporter waiting outside the gate. He was not imagining a book. He was a technician. When equipment does something abnormal, you make your own record before somebody resets the machine. During the next 2 weeks, Owen started watching daytime sessions differently. Not the grays, the humans. Pike adjusted her glasses with the side of her middle finger. 2 nights later, Subject 1 raised a hand to the same point beside its eye. It had no glasses. Frank rolled his right shoulder when tired. Subject 2 began making the same motion. Willis pressed his thumb against his belt. Subject 1 copied it. Brenner rubbed the back of his neck before difficult sessions. Subject 2 repeated that too. At first, Owen classified the behaviors as mimicry. Then something bothered him. The beings were copying movements with no obvious utility. The examination sequence made sense. Perhaps they were learning procedure. Tapping a wall could test material, but adjusting non-existent glasses? Rubbing a neck? Rolling a shoulder? Why copy a meaningless habit? Owen divided a notebook page vertically. On the left, he wrote, Funkin. On the right, no Funkin. Opening a panel went left. Using a chair went left. Handling a tray went left. Pike's glasses gesture went right. Frank's shoulder went right. Brenner's neck went right. Willis's belt gesture went right. Within days, the right column became longer than the left. That was the first moment. Owen wondered whether the beings were not learning what humans did. Maybe they were learning what humans looked like while doing it. The thought sounded absurd. He wrote nothing. Instead, he devised a test. Owen had a habit inherited from his father. 3 taps of his index finger against a desk. Always 3. His father used to do it at the kitchen table when thinking. Owen had apparently copied him as a boy and carried the gesture into adulthood. Once he noticed himself doing it in the control room, he began using it deliberately. Every evening before starting the recorders, tap, tap, tap. Nobody inside the observation rooms could see him, at least according to the architecture. The control room window was one way. The cameras faced away from him. There was no microphone positioned near his desk. Owen performed the gesture for 9 consecutive nights. Nothing. By the 10th, he felt foolish. He almost stopped. At 1:36 that morning, Subject 1 approached camera 3. It did not approach the window. It approached the camera. The being stopped directly beneath the lens, raised its left hand and tapped the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. Owen's body went cold. The being lowered its arm, then tilted its head upward toward the camera. There is a peculiar fear that comes from getting the result you wanted. Until that second, Owen had wanted confirmation. Now he desperately wanted another explanation. He rewound the tape, played it again. 3 taps. He checked the audio channel in case some mechanical sound had created the pattern. Nothing, he called Cole. The lieutenant came down within 4 minutes. Owen replayed the tape. Cole watched silently again. Then he asked, "What did you do?" Owen hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Before this." "Nothing." Cole turned toward him. "What did you do, Mercer?" Owen told him. "The tapping. 9 nights. Behind the observation wall." Cole's expression barely changed, but his voice did. "Who authorized that?" "Nobody. You attempted communication. I tapped my desk. You introduced a repeated signal. They shouldn't be able to see me. You don't know that they saw you. How else did it know?" Cole shut off the monitor. "You're finished testing them." "I didn't test them. You just described the design of a test." Cole removed the reel. Owen watched him carry it away. The following night, his desk had been moved farther from the observation glass. No explanation. He sat down. Started the equipment. Did not tap. Just after midnight, Subject 1 approached the same section of wall. 3 taps. Owen remained still. 30 seconds passed. 3 more. Nothing. Then Subject 2 crossed the room. Subject 1 tapped 3 times. Subject 2 looked toward it, raised one hand. 3 taps on the examination surface. Subject 1 responded. 3. Subject 2 answered. 3. Owen opened his notebook. For the first time since beginning the job, he was not sure what category he was observing. This was no longer imitation. The gesture had become something shared between the beings. A copied human habit had been converted into a signal. Owen wrote, "They can turn imitation into language." He stared at the sentence, then crossed out language. "Too strong," he wrote. "They can turn imitation into exchange." That felt safer. It did not feel safer for long. Within days, additional staff began appearing. Somebody above Owen's level had clearly taken the tapping seriously. Researchers introduced new controlled signals, lights, geometric cards, recorded tones, hand gestures, colored panels. The beings responded minimally. Red light, nothing. Triangle, nothing. 2 tones, nothing obvious. A series of symbols, no response. Brenner became increasingly frustrated. One afternoon, Owen watched him pace 6 steps across the room, turn sharply, then pace back. 6 steps, turn, 6. He did it repeatedly while Pike reviewed notes. Subject 1 watched from the far side. That night, after everyone left, the gray began pacing. 6 steps, turn, 6. Owen's attention sharpened. The humans were presenting deliberate communication. During the day, the beings seemed far more interested in behavior no one intended as communication. That distinction began changing the investigation inside Owen's head. Maybe the researchers were teaching the wrong things. Or perhaps teaching was not what the beings wanted. A week later came the chairs. 3 identical metal chairs were placed in the west room. Brenner occupied one. Pike sat opposite him. The third remained empty. Subject 1 stood nearby. For almost an hour, the scientist conducted a simple recognition session. Object, card, question, pause, another object. Very little happened. Near the end, Lieutenant Cole entered unexpectedly. Pike stood immediately. It was automatic. A subordinate acknowledging a superior. The movement lasted perhaps 1 second. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody even seemed to notice. That night, Subject 1 entered the chair area. It sat where Pike had been. Subject 2 moved toward the doorway. Subject 1 stayed seated. Subject 2 crossed the room. Nothing. Then Subject 2 stopped exactly where Cole had stood. Subject 1 rose. Owen leaned forward. The beings reset. Again, Subject 1 sits. Subject 2 enters. No reaction. Subject 2 moves to Cole's position. Subject 1 stands. Again. Then they exchanged roles. Subject 2 sits. Subject 1 enters. Subject 1 reaches Cole's position. Subject 2 rises. For the first time, Owen did not immediately write anything. He wanted to see whether the pattern repeated enough to survive interpretation. It did, 6 times. Then both beings returned to the wall. Owen sat back. This was not copying a chair. It was not copying a man. It was copying a relationship. Position A did nothing. Position B produced standing. Why? Because a particular human occupied position B. Or because that human possessed a status that changed other humans. Owen wrote 1 line. They noticed rank. The next morning he showed Cole. The lieutenant did not seem surprised. That bothered Owen. You already watched the tape, Cole replied. Yes, and? And what? They're studying hierarchy. You don't know that. They're recreating it. You are assigning a human concept to observe positioning behavior. Owen stared at him. Do you actually talk like this in your head? Cole almost smiled. Almost. Then he said, Mercer, the fastest way to misunderstand something unfamiliar is to make it familiar too early. Owen considered that. You think I'm trying to make them human? Yes. Owen looked toward the rooms. No. He was beginning to understand the opposite possibility. I think they're trying to make humans predictable. Cole's expression changed, only slightly. But enough, Owen noticed. The lieutenant left without answering. That was the moment Owen began wondering whether any of this was new. He had been assigned to the annex for weeks. The subjects had clearly been there longer. Somebody must have watched nights before him, so he found Raymond Bell. Bell worked daylight maintenance, 54, quiet. He had been at the annex long enough that even officers treated him like furniture. Owen waited until they were alone in a storage room. Did you ever work nights? Bell continued sorting connectors. Years ago, with the subjects? Bell stopped, only for a fraction of a second, then continued. Don't know what you're talking about. Owen said nothing. Bell packed the connectors into a case, then sighed. There's jobs where curiosity gets you promoted, Mercer. He closed the case. This isn't one. He left. 2 nights later, Owen opened an old maintenance cabinet searching for spare fuses. A stack of camera manuals leaned against the back wall. Behind them was a faded yellow notebook. The first pages contained exactly what he expected. Voltage readings, tube replacements, tape speed corrections, camera numbers. The handwriting was Bell's. Then the entries changed. Subject stood beside door after orderly exited. Subject repeated arm position. Subject placed hands behind back in manner of Dr. S. Owen turned another page. There were dozens, months, maybe more. Then one sentence appeared beneath a thick pencil line. They do almost nothing original while watched. The next page contained another. When alone, they become us. Owen sat down on the floor. For almost an hour, he read. Bell had seen the same things. Examination sequences, gestures, habits, positions. But his notes went further. After months, Bell created a category Owen had not yet reached. Anticipation. Subject moved to physician position prior to physician entering. Subject looked toward corridor before personnel arrival. Subject assumed posture associated with call, R, approximately 11 minutes before entry. At first, Bell had blamed sound, doors, footsteps, ventilation. Then he documented an incident he apparently could not explain. A physician decided to alter the normal examination sequence. The revised order had supposedly been discussed outside the subject area. Yet the night before the new procedure occurred, Subject 2 reconstructed something remarkably similar to it. Owen read the entry 3 times. The implication made no sense. He returned the notebook to the cabinet before dawn. The next afternoon, Bell was waiting there. You found it. Owen did not pretend otherwise. Yes. Bell closed the door behind him. You should forget it. You didn't. No. Why leave it here? Bell looked tired. Same reason you've got one in your jacket. Owen said nothing. Bell pointed at him. You think you're the first night man to take notes home? Apparently not. They sat. Bell told him the mimicry had begun long before Owen's assignment. At first, everyone assumed curiosity, then learning, then communication. Eventually, Bell stopped liking any of the labels. We kept thinking they're learning actions, he said. Aren't they? No. What are they learning? Bell rubbed both hands together. Relationships between actions, he explained. A cup meant almost nothing, but who gave the cup to whom mattered. A door meant little, but which person could make another person open it mattered. A badge was only an object. The behavior of everyone around the badge revealed its meaning. The beings ignored many symbols humans deliberately presented to them. Yet they absorbed authority, attention, routine, permission, and social position with unsettling efficiency. Bell called it social geometry. Owen laughed at the phrase. Bell didn't. People think society is words and laws. He pointed toward the corridor. Half of it is where everyone stands. Maybe they're trying to understand us. That was my first theory. What changed? Bell looked toward the closed door. They started getting ahead. Owen thought about the anticipation notes. Bell would not elaborate much further. He said only that, after he showed his notebook to someone outside the immediate program, he was moved to daylight work. No threat, no interrogation, just reassignment. Why are you still here? Pension. That answer was so ordinary Owen believed it immediately. Bell stood. Before leaving, he said, "Don't assume the glass means you're on the safe side of the experiment." Owen never forgot that sentence. From then on, every daytime session looked different. The humans believed they were observing the subjects. Owen began seeing two simultaneous studies. Doctors measured bodies. The Greys measured rooms. Humans presented cards. Greys watched who held them. Humans tested response. Greys watched who gave orders. Humans recorded behavior. Greys watched what changed human behavior. Then came the door. The West Room used a two-stage lock. First, a security officer activated an electronic release from a protected station. Then, a corridor orderly operated a mechanical lever. Neither person could open the door independently. Owen had seen the sequence dozens of times. Cole would raise two fingers. The security officer pressed the release. The orderly moved the lever. The door opened. 2 fingers. Button. Lever door. Nobody thought of it as communication. It was routine. That afternoon, Cole entered the room. 2 fingers. Button. Lever door. Subject 1 watched. At 12:52 that night, Subject 1 approached the sealed door. Subject 2 moved toward the opposite wall. Subject 1 raised 2 fingers. Owen's stomach tightened. Subject 2 extended one hand toward empty space, as though pressing something. Subject 1 turned toward the door. Nothing. They reset 2 fingers in visible control. Door again. Owen called Cole. No answer. He called the security desk. Sergeant Willis arrived. Owen pointed toward the monitor. Just watch. The sequence repeated. 2 fingers. Button. Door. Willis whispered, Jesus Christ. Subject 1 stopped. Slowly, it turned toward the observation window. Not the camera this time. The window. Then it raised 2 fingers. Willis stepped backward. The facility alarm activated. A low pulsing tone. Internal doors locked. Officers appeared in the corridor. Cole arrived last. What happened? Willis pointed. It knows the release sequence. Cole's response was immediate. No. Owen looked at him. Watch. Subject 1 raised 2 fingers. Subject 2 performed the invisible control action. Cole stared. Then something changed. Subject 1 walked away from the door. It crossed the room. Stopped at the exact location where Cole normally stood while authorizing entry. Subject 2 moved to the doorway. Waited. Subject 1 raised 2 fingers. Owen understood before anyone spoke. Subject 1 had taken Cole's role. Subject 2 had taken the role of the person waiting for permission. The humans had spent months trying to teach them pictures and tones. The beings had learned authorization. Cole ordered everyone out of the control room. Owen went home. He did not sleep. The next evening, camera 3 was gone. The observation window had been covered by a steel panel. Subject 1 had been transferred. No explanation. Subject 2 remained. For 3 nights, the surviving Grey barely moved. The overhead camera showed it standing near the far wall. Owen no longer knew whether stillness meant inactivity. That assumption had been destroyed. On the 4th night, Subject 2 raised a hand. 3 taps against the wall. Owen's signal. Then 2 fingers. Cole. Hands behind back. Brenner. Fingers beside eye. Pike. Shoulder roll. Frank. Thumb against waist. Willis. Tap, tap, pause, tap Ellis. One gesture after another. Not random. A sequence of humans. Owen watched without writing. Subject 2 seemed to possess a vocabulary made from people. Not their names, their behaviors, their positions, the ways they changed the room. Then the being sat down, both hands on its knees, and remained motionless for nearly 6 hours. Morning staff arrived. Pike entered, no reaction. Brenner, nothing. Cole stood outside the door, still nothing. Then, Raymond Bell walked past the corridor carrying a toolbox. The Grey turned its head. Bell stopped. Subject 2 raised one hand. Tap, tap, tap. Bell's face went pale. He kept walking. That afternoon, Subject 2 was removed. Owen never saw either being again. His assignment continued for 29 days. The facility became boring. Almost aggressively boring. Normal equipment, normal maintenance, normal signatures. The extraordinary rooms were gradually emptied. Nobody discussed what had happened. Owen's official reports changed, not all at once. He discovered it when asked to sign a compiled monthly summary. Entries he remembered writing had been simplified. Nothing was completely false. Subject imitates Dr. Brenner's standing posture had become. Subject stood adjacent to examination area with arms posterior. The wall tapping became repeated manual contact with structural surface. The three-tap exchange became subjects displayed reciprocal motor behavior. The authorization sequence became repeated arm elevation and position changes adjacent to secured exit. Technically true, almost meaningless. Owen refused to sign the first copy. A clerk brought another. What changed? Owen asked. Formatting. This isn't formatting. The clerk looked uncomfortable. I don't write them. Who does? No answer. Owen signed eventually. He hated himself for it for years, but Ruth had just given birth. He had 2 children, a mortgage, a temporary assignment nearing completion. Real life has a way of making dramatic moral decisions look very different at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Nobody threatened him. Nobody followed him home. No mysterious car sat outside his house. He was simply transferred back to conventional communications maintenance. Normal work, normal salary, normal life. That silence was more effective than intimidation. What exactly would Owen have reported? That he watched 2 impossible beings imitate government workers. He had no tape, no photograph, no object, no document proving what the rooms contained. Only his notebook, and notebooks proved that someone wrote something. Not that it happened. So Owen kept it. Years passed, his children grew. Technology changed. Black and white tube monitors became obsolete. Magnetic tape systems disappeared from the workplaces he serviced. The strange autumn of 1978 gradually began feeling less like a memory and more like something he had once dreamed very carefully. But one question never left him. What were they doing when the scientists went home? Every public story about alleged gray encounters seemed centered on humans. What did they do to us? Why examine bodies? Why cause missing time? Why take samples? Why communicate telepathically? Why return people? Those are understandable questions, but they carry an assumption that humans are always the object. Owen's Knights suggested the examination table might be only one part of the study. Maybe bodies were one data set. Behavior was another. Authority, permission, imitation, prediction. How one human makes another human act. That possibility changed the meaning of the door sequence. The beings never opened the door. They never overpowered security. They never escaped. Nothing cinematic happened. But Subject 1 had apparently learned something more important than the mechanism of a lock. It had learned that certain humans could cause other humans to open locks. That is not mechanical knowledge. It is social knowledge. And if you were trying to understand an unfamiliar civilization, social knowledge might be far more useful. Imagine arriving in human society with no context. A general and a private are both human bodies. A judge and a defendant are both people sitting in a room. A billionaire's signature and a stranger's signature are the same kind of ink. A plastic identification badge has no inherent power. A uniform is cloth. Money is paper. A password is sound. Yet those symbols and positions move enormous systems because humans collectively agree that they mean something. Understanding machinery would not be enough. You would have to learn invisible rules. Who waits? Who enters first? Who sits? Who stands? Who is allowed to touch which object? Whose gesture makes the door open? Owen believed that was what he had watched. Not Greys learning to impersonate people. That was too simple. They were constructing a model of human cause and effect. Bell's phrase was better. Social geometry. A room full of humans contains invisible lines. Authority, fear, affection, attention, habit, obedience. All connecting people who may never state those relationships aloud. Watch long enough and the lines become visible through behavior. Perhaps that explains why the supposedly meaningless gestures mattered. Pike touching her glasses, Frank rolling his shoulder, Brenner holding his hands behind his back. Those did not open doors, but they identified individuals. And once an observer learns that specific behaviors belong to specific people, it can begin distinguishing one human role from another, then comparing them, then predicting them. This is where Owen's original notebook becomes most interesting, even inside a fictional account. He had written, "They are practicing what we do. Then, they are learning what we do." But his final interpretation was different. Near the last pages, he crossed out both sentences. Underneath, he wrote, "They are learning what makes us do things." That difference is the entire story. Copying a movement is mimicry. Understanding why one movement changes another person is modeling. The more Owen considered it, the less comforting the distinction became. Because most human systems are protected from outsiders by one assumption. The outsider does not understand the system. A lock can be strong. A fence can be high. But humans themselves are often the interface. Show the right badge. Use the right language. Stand in the right place. Make the right gesture. And the system moves for you. That does not mean Owen believed the beings intended infiltration. He never claimed that. He had learned one thing from the annex. Observation does not automatically reveal motive. Maybe they were curious. Maybe social behavior was as mysterious to them as their biology was to us. Maybe they had no equivalent of rank. Maybe they did. Maybe they were trying to understand why humans voluntarily obey symbols. Maybe the entire phenomenon was nothing more than intellectual curiosity. Or maybe the purpose was something no human category could contain. Owen refused to choose. That uncertainty is one reason his notebook, if such a notebook existed, would be more interesting than a neat confession. He did not know. He had behavior, not motive. But behavior was enough to invert the original relationship. Humans entered those rooms, believing the subjects were being observed. Yet every examination also exposed the observers. Every order revealed hierarchy. Every habit revealed identity. Every door revealed permission. Every reaction revealed expectation. Every attempt to study the beings gave the beings another opportunity to study the humans. The observation glass had never been one way in the way that mattered. Decades later, Owen wrote one final sentence beneath the old notes. "We spent every day measuring them." What were they measuring while we did it? There is no definitive answer. There cannot be. This story is an original speculative narrative, not evidence that any 1978 facility held non-human beings, but the audience question that inspired it remains surprisingly powerful. What would Greys do when they were not abducting anyone? Maybe our instinctive picture is wrong. We imagine downtime, rest, conversation, feeding, sleep, whatever the non-human equivalent of ordinary life might be. Those are reasonable questions, because that is how human organisms work. But what if the beings in these stories operate around a continuous objective? What if observation does not end when the examination ends? Then their apparent inactivity might not be inactivity. Stillness could be attention. Silence could be information gathering. Watching could be work. Humans are biased toward noticing movement. We notice the surgeon's hands, the aircraft taking off, the predator running, the door opening. We are less sensitive to something that simply watches. Yet observation can be active. A scientist can sit motionless for an hour and work intensely. A security can do the same. So can a student, if another intelligence were truly attempting to understand human society. Perhaps the moments after the official experiment would be more useful than the experiment itself. During the experiment, humans perform. They ask deliberate questions. They control variables. They behave professionally. Afterward, the mask loosens. Somebody complains. Somebody obeys. Someone glances toward a superior. A tired technician taps his desk 3 times without realizing anyone is paying attention. Those are the moments culture leaks out. And if Owen Mercer misunderstood one thing at the beginning, it was this. He thought the Greys were alone after midnight. By the end, he no longer believed they had ever been alone. They had been observing the observers. And after weeks of watching them through the glass, Owen could no longer tell which side of it had actually been the laboratory.